In 1909, the U.S. Army fortified El Fraile Island in the Philippines into a concrete battleship known as Fort Drum. It was named in honor of Brigadier General Richard Drum, who served in the Mexican-American War and Civil War with distinction. Construction commenced in April of 1909, only a few months before the passing of the general, and took 5 years to be completed. The rocky outcropping was leveled and outfitted with 14-inch, 360mm armored gun turrets by the United States Army Corps of Engineers to protect Manila Bay. It was unlike any American fort built between the Civil War and World War II, as it counted both as a sea fort and as a turreted land fort. A 20-foot, 6-meter thick steel-reinforced deck and walls up to 36 feet, 11 meters thick, made the position impervious to artillery. Captured by the Japanese in World War II, Fort Drum was only retaken after being pumped full of fuel and set on fire, which left it out of commission. The ruins have been looted of scrap metal since the 1970s, an activity which was reported in 2009 as ongoing. The island is currently and officially part of the city of Cavite in the province of Cavite. An automatic light was installed by the Philippine Coast Guard to warn ships entering the South Channel of the presence of the abandoned fort. Johnston Atoll. Johnston Atoll in the Pacific Ocean was finally decommissioned by the U.S. military in 2004 after decades of weapons testing. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had granted the island to the Navy through an executive order for an air station, marking the beginning of its path to becoming a military base. It was then given to the United States Air Force. It was passed between different military branches and agencies throughout its history as a test site and military base. From 1958 to 1963, the 4 islands making up the atoll were the site of nuclear weapons experiments that littered the area with fallout. Among the tests was the failure of Bluegill Prime, during which a nuclear-armed Thor missile exploded and burned on launch. A total of 35 nuclear tests were conducted near the atoll. In 1965, the site transitioned to chemical warfare testing and was a storage site for 1.8 million gallons, 6.8 million liters of Agent Orange. Some of the biological agents released on the island include Francisella tularensis, which causes tularemia, also known as rabbit fever. It has a 60% mortality rate without antibiotics. Also released was Coxiella burnetii, which causes Q fever, a cold-like disease that inflames the inner lining of the heart and can become chronic. In 1970, Congress decided to change the purpose of the island, making it a facility for storage, decommission, and destruction of chemical weapons. At one point, the atoll hosted 6.6% of the military's chemical arsenal. In 2003, most of the structures on the island were destroyed, with the runway marked closed. The only structures left intact were the Joint Operations Center to the east of the runway, the chemical bunkers hosting weapons, and one Quonset hut. Following the final evacuation of military personnel, doors to the Operations Center were welded shut. The island is currently an unincorporated territory managed by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. It's designated as a national wildlife refuge that the public cannot access unless they receive a letter of authorization from the United States Air Force and a special use permit from the U.S. FWS. The Michelson Safeguard Complex. The Michelson Safeguard Complex was an anti-ballistic missile complex protecting the Minutemen launchers of North Dakota. It was in operation for less than a year between 1975 and 1976, despite costing over $6 billion to build. It was built as a cluster of facilities with the launch and control areas for 30 Spartan anti-ballistic missiles and 70 Sprint anti-ballistic missiles. All the missiles were kept inside of underground launch silos. The mysterious uncapped pyramid reportedly housed radar and controls to track and intercept incoming threats. Given its expanse and short official life, rumors ran rampant about classified tests and Illuminati connections. It was only ever at full operational capability for one day, on October 1st, 1975, as the House of Representatives voted to decommission it the following day. The complex was vacated entirely and deactivated in February of 1976. Interestingly, this was not the end for the Michelson Safeguard Complex, however, as it was auctioned in December of 2012. The property was bought for $530,000 by the Spring Creek Hutterite Colony, an ethno-religious group formed from a branch of Anabaptists. Below the surface, there are said to be miles of secret caverns and abandoned halls that can fill up with thick fog. Monsell Sea Forts. The UK's Monsell Army Force was sunk into the beds of the Mersey and Thames estuaries during World War II. Each tower was equipped with radar, searchlights, and anti-aircraft guns to intercept incoming aircraft and rockets. The towers were used as sea forts, with their name taken from their designer, Guy Monsell. Positioned miles away from land to increase warning times, the forts were incredibly isolated in the cold sea. There were 4 principal bases: Rough Sands, Tongue Sands, Knock John, and Sunk Head. The military base has been likened to early offshore oil platforms. They're made of a reinforced concrete pontoon base with a support structure of 60 feet in addition to the concrete tower, with each weighing around 4,500 tons. Each pair of towers had a total of 7 floors, with 4 to house soldiers and staff, with the rest serving to protect storage, dining spaces, and operations facilities. Some soldiers are said to have developed fort madness that required psychiatric treatment, as they spent around 6 weeks at a time in the forts at extremely close quarters. Those at underwater levels had the most severe form, as they were often without sufficient light or heat. Despite various attempts to occupy and claim the towers as independent nations, particularly the Principality of Sealand in Ruff's Tower, the ruins now sit abandoned. Clark Air Base Hospital. During the Vietnam War, Clark Air Base Hospital in Angeles in the Philippines was a hub for repatriating traumatized U.S. POWs, but it was mostly abandoned in 1991 after sustaining extensive damage from the eruption of Mount Pinatubo. Both Filipino and American soldiers were treated at this hospital throughout the years, leading many to believe that the ghosts of soldiers past haunt the remains of this building. The Clark Air Base, established in 1903, played a vital role in both World War II, especially towards the end, and in the Vietnam War. While the site where the hospital stood was used during both of these conflicts, it wasn't formally built until 1964. The hospital provided top medical care for soldiers until 1991. Starting in April, rising magma beneath Mount Pinatubo shook the ground, causing steam explosions and earthquakes, warning those in the area to run. These eruptions continued throughout May and June, covering the area with sulfur dioxide and volcanic clouds. Finally, after months of signs and warnings, on June 12th, magma packed with gas sped to the peak of the volcano and slightly erupted. The damage was not done. 3 days later, on June 15th, the volcano erupted violently. This time, the explosion pumped 1.2 cubic miles of volcanic material onto the surface. An ash cloud of 22 miles formed in the sky, traveling in all directions at low altitudes due to a simultaneous and ill-timed typhoon. Satellites even captured the ash to reach other parts of the globe. Hot gas and volcanic matter left the insides of Mount Pinatubo, swallowing the surrounding valleys with hot magma and volcanic rocks. The magma reached a height of around 680 feet from the soil in the areas that received the most debris from the explosion. So much magma flowed out of the volcano that the tip collapsed, creating a caldera. Following a massive airlift evacuation, over a foot of ash collapsed many of the unoccupied buildings on the base. The hospital was left behind as all its American staff and patients were flown out to safety. In 2016, the United States Air Force formed an air contingent with A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft and HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters to travel from Pyeongtaek and Okinawa to the Clark Air Base. Their mission has been to patrol the disputed islands on the South China Sea and survey for any potential risks of engaged conflict between participants. Today, the hospital ruins are believed to be one of the most haunted sites in the Philippines, stalked by the screaming ghost of the wounded, of those who could not outrun the ash, and those who met their maker by choice. Dark 5 is bringing a new channel to light, Dark Photos. Click the new logo on screen or the link in the description below to subscribe now. Join us as we explore the unbelievable true stories behind photos that expose hidden places, strange secrets, dark histories, and incredible events caught on camera.